I want to touch on another aspect of socio-sexual dynamics. This is one I don't touch on as much, but I'm going to start touching on more directly sexual concepts more. So when we're talking about a masculine feminine dynamic, when it comes to a dom sub relationship, my personal belief is that for a man and a woman, when you want to create a good, naturally dominant, submissive relationship all around, it's good for that to permeate outwards from the sexual relationship. It can go into the sexual relationship, but it's much easier for that to go from the sexual relationship outward, right? Because when the level of sexual attraction isn't high enough, then oftentimes how a woman responds to you is going to be based off of her emotions. And sex is felt in the body the same way that emotions are felt in the body. So while sex alone is not enough for a woman to necessarily love you, sexual desire is enough for a woman to feel you on an emotional level. And I'm going to explain why. Now, when we're talking about a dom sub relationship, it can often work like this. A dom takes the role of being the primary receiver of ego satisfaction or ego gratification or validation, which means that you please that person physically, and your focus is not primarily on your pleasure. Your focus is primarily on giving pleasure, and by pleasing them, it strokes your ego, and you're a secondary receiver of physical pleasure. And what a sub is a sub is someone who takes primarily the physical pleasure of sex, but they're a secondary receiver of ego gratification. So what I mean by this is this. Let's say you're having sex with a woman, and there's a reason why there should be a dynamic here, right? There's a reason why there should be a dynamic here. As a man, now there are going to be exceptions, but in most instances, as a man, if you're having sex with a woman, you're going to get yours regardless. So if you are the primary receiver of sexual pleasure, then chances are the person who's the primary receiver of sexual pleasure is probably going to come faster. They're going to come more often. And they're not going to be able to fully focus on giving the other person pleasure because they're wrapped up in receiving pleasure. You're releasing your inhibitions, you're releasing restraint, and you're releasing yourself from the pressure of giving a person a certain level of satisfaction. Now, for a woman, how this can work, when a woman is a sub, when a woman is a submissive, she's focusing on receiving pleasure, on reaching her orgasm, on releasing her inhibitions, and releasing control. She's giving up control. But secondary is her being satisfied and being attracted to the fact that you're attracted to her, right? So for a sub, she's going to get turned on by you having an orgasm, of course. Like if she's submissive with you, feeling like you're close is going to help push her over the edge. And not only is it going to help push her over the edge, but it's going to turn her on. But this is the big but. Like the window period of time between when a man is close and he orgasms, and also the refractory time of most men is going to be much longer, and the time between when he starts getting close and when he comes is going to be a lot shorter than for a woman in most instances. Understand what I'm saying by this? So let's say as a man, a woman can take that role of, if she takes that role of being primarily after the satisfaction of you and secondarily focusing on her satisfaction, and you're also taking that position of wanting to please that woman, like let's say you're a beta male, what's going to happen in this instance is you're going to cancel each other out. Two givers cancel each other out unless you know how to take turns. Listen, I've been there. Two givers cancel each other out unless you know how to take turns. So what that means is this. Let's say you and the woman are both focusing on trying to please each other and you're having vaginal intercourse. When that happens, chances are, unless the woman and unless the physical compatibility and the natural time it takes you to orgasm is just so much greater than hers, she's probably not going to have, excuse me, she's probably not going to have orgasms from penetration. She's probably not. And she may be okay with that for a period of time if she's a giver. But she's not going to be able to fully get into her feminine energy. She's not. When you're both givers, chances are your sexual relationship is just going to revolve around giving each other head. Because when you give each other head, that's when you give yourself the freedom to feel desired, but to focus on your sexual pleasure. You know, if you see a relationship, or if you've been in a relationship where both of you primarily get your satisfaction off through getting head, then chances are both of you are givers, right? Both of you are givers. So when a woman primarily focuses on her pleasure, and usually that requires a certain level of sexual attraction, or a certain level of sexual skill, and a certain level of lust being there, what happens is that woman's going to focus on her pleasure. So as you're stroking her, she's going to climb that ladder. I give this example kind of like, imagine you're rock climbing. There are certain contractions that happen in the pelvic area, certain contractions that happen with your penis or your PC muscles, like that may happen in your prostate or whatever it is while you're stroking a woman. And as she's stroking you, or she's sucking you, or whatever it is, that's going to continue, that's going to contract. And as it contracts, it's like you're climbing, it's like you're rock climbing. As you're rock climbing, you get higher up and higher up until you reach it. Every once in a while, if her rhythm or how it feels, if it's too rough, that may be as if there's too much friction, it's going to be too much strain on your body. But if there's too little friction, that would be as if, let's say when you're climbing up, the rocks, they you know, you're reaching for a rock, and then that rock breaks off, and then you might fall down some, but you might be able to catch your space and continue to climb up. As you're climbing up, if there's not enough friction, which would be, let's say if a woman's sleeping with a guy and his dick is not big enough and it doesn't create enough friction, or you're dealing with a woman with a looser vagina, or it's too wet for how loose it, for how tight it is, it's too wet. You know, and some people don't talk about that. A vagina can be too wet for how tight it is and not provide you enough friction. Now, for most men, we're accustomed to getting ours. And because we're accustomed to getting ours, we have a lot of practice with knowing how to climb that. So even if a man's getting some pussy and it's not that good, he can still get his nut off. But for most women, they're not accustomed to having vaginal orgasms, so they're not as used to making that climb, which is that PC muscle. It's where those muscles are being flexed. It's just like Kegels. So with that, as you receive pleasure, it creates those contractions. As those contractions are created, you're climbing up this rock. You're climbing up. It's like you're rock climbing. And as you climb up, if the pace of it and the pleasure of it, the friction is at a good level, the lubrication is at a good level, the stimulation is hitting the spots that it needs to be hit, and at a rhythm and a pace and an intensity that's necessary for you, you climb up, you climb up, you climb up until you eventually reach over that peak. Now, when a woman is looking for ego gratification primarily, and she's looking for pleasure secondary, then she's only going to really be able to climb up if she feels like you're about to come. So let's say that woman's climbing up that wall, but she can't really climb because she's not focusing on her pleasure, so she's not actively making those contractions that are necessary to climb up towards the point of orgasm. Or if you do not know the spots that you're hitting and know the spots that will bring her to orgasm, and know the type of penis that you have to be able to hit those spots in a way that's necessary, then what's going to happen is you're not going to create the stimulation that helps her climb up that wall. You're not going to be able to get the stimulation that helps her climb up that wall. So if you're hitting that spot, but she only gets close as you're getting close, then she will start to get close. And let's say it's going to take her a minute. Let's say it's going to take her a minute to 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes of direct stimulation on that spot that gets her close, right? Let's say that's what she needs. But she doesn't start getting close to you start getting close. And it might take you maybe 30 seconds after you start getting close before you have your orgasm. And then your refractory period may have it, though, that some men, they can keep going after they come, but some can only keep going for maybe a minute. Some have to stop immediately. So let's say you're climbing up, but she doesn't start really climbing until you get close. That woman is never going to have an orgasm from penetration. This is a thing that's going to help a lot of people. I understand this right here, right? And sometimes that wall doesn't start pushing for a woman. And sometimes women have mental blocks. When a woman is primarily looking for ego gratification and she's not focused on pleasure, there are going to be certain mental blocks in the way that keep her from wanting to reach that point, because that loss of control is scary. That woman is afraid of losing control because she's not used to being naturally feminine and submissive and things like that. So let's say a woman could say, hold on, hold on, hold on. She'd be like, oh, baby, please stop. And I'm not talking about rape. I'm talking about when a woman just has that fear of losing control. You just keep hitting that spot, keep hitting that spot. Now, one thing that can help right here as a man is, if you know a woman has somewhat of this mindset, there's two ways of doing it. Either you find a way to hit that spot, and then you convince her that you're closer than you are so that she starts climbing that ladder, or you start dominating that woman, and as you're dominating her, you force her to submit. You force her into a position to where you're hitting that spot repetitively. And then as she starts trying to combat that, because she has a fear of reaching that finish line, you keep pushing past that and you keep digging her guts until she busts. Like, hey, shout out to Steph is cold. Now, when I'm talking about there is the primary receiver of pleasure and the secondary receiver of validation, it works like this. If that woman doesn't feel sexy, a woman can cheat. You can give a woman the best dick she ever had and she'll go fuck somebody else so that she can feel like her pussy's good. A man can fuck a woman and that could be the best pussy he ever had, but if she doesn't have an orgasm, he is going to lose interest in having sex with her eventually because he isn't receiving validation from it, right? So it's a balance of both. You need both. So a woman still needs to feel like her pussy is good. Sometimes this is something that can happen with those semen retention guys. When a guy goes extra alpha male, extra dom, right? And I've done this before, and I've had women hate my guts for this. There have been women I slept with, and I could make them come 20 times, or I could make them come 10, 12 times in a night, or 8 times, or whatever it is, or 6 times in a session. You can make a woman come all those times, but if you don't get your nut, it's going to make her feel insecure. And for a little while, that'll give her a little bit more motivation. But after a while, it'll start to wear on that woman's insecurities and wear on her self-esteem until the point where she may lose interest in having sex with you because you aren't giving her the validation that she desires through sex. So one aspect of a woman who is sexually submissive is not just her being willing to engage in the act of sex with you, but does that woman have sex with you actively seeking to have pleasure? And another aspect of it is a woman still needs to be somebody who desires to please you. That's another aspect of being a submissive. So you can usually tell a woman's desire to please you through her ability to give you head and how much she desires and enjoys giving you head, giving you pleasure through doing something that doesn't please her directly. So a woman can be completely selfish when it comes to pleasure, to where she doesn't want to give you head, but she just wants to have sex. That's why dealing with a woman who is just has a high sex drive isn't necessarily just a cue of a woman who you're going to be sexually compatible with. She could just love dick, right? She could just love dick and not really feel like sucking dick like that. So these are just some things to understand. There's the primary receiver of validation and secondary receiver of pleasure. When you're a dom and you're getting a woman into her feminine submissive energy sexually, you're going to take that role of being the primary receiver of validation and the secondary receiver of pleasure. Now, your pleasure is still necessary, because if you aren't focused on your pleasure at all as a man, your dick will be soft and you won't come. And then that woman is going to feel some type of way about you. She may call you gay. I saw a post the other day where this woman said this guy was fucking me forever, and I feel like he's gay because I got that good pussy and I usually make guys come fast. Now, that could be just a woman with control issues who wants to be the receiver, but you have to understand it's like this. This also plays into the power dynamics of a relationship. If you prematurely put yourself in a position with the woman where when you're having sex with her, you're only focused on your own pleasure, then what can happen is either you have to be distant outside of sex and inconsistent, and then you just hit her up when you want pleasure, or it's going to be a situation to where that woman will control the relationship through access to her sexually because you're the one who's focused on your pleasure. It's addicting to release your inhibitions. It's addicting to lose control. That's something that's pleasurable for both men and women. It's pleasurable for both men and women. But as a man, emotional discipline gives you the ability to not focus. Emotional discipline, it gives you the ability to not focus on your own pleasure primarily, but to focus on that woman's pleasure. And then after she's come 1, 2, 3 times, depending on your dynamic, that's when you go ahead and get your nut off. But if you're dealing with a woman and she doesn't focus on her own pleasure when you're having sex, it's easy to lose. It's easy to lose motivation to continue stroking her and to continue working towards her orgasm if it doesn't seem like she's trying to make those contractions in her vagina in order to work towards orgasm. And it can make you feel like your dick is not good. But another thing that can happen is not only could you lose interest like that, but you could question where you stand with that woman. And I think I lost my train of thought a little bit. But another thing that can happen is, like I said, a woman could, take control of the relationship. But let's see, where was I at with this? There's more to it. There's more to it. But, here it is. You want a woman who gets in the habit, who gets in the rhythm of losing control and of relinquishing control when she deals with you sexually. And then as you explain that to her, it will make it much easier for that to permeate outside of sex. So when that permeates outside of sex, when there are things that come up, and when a woman usually would have a reflex of wanting to control things and to protect herself because she's had pain mixed with pleasure, and that pain mixed with pleasure help push her over the edge, it's going to be easier for that woman to be submissive with you because she knows that when you take her to somewhere she hasn't been before, she liked it when she got there. And what that does is it helps permeate the sexual aspect of the dom-sub relationship, and it permeates out into the overall relationship to where when you're dealing with one another, that woman is a lot more familiar with the concept of relinquishing control to a man. And you're also more inclined, and you're more acquainted with the dynamic of of making the sacrifice of going after whatever gives you emotional pleasure and emotional stimulation so that you can please that woman. But at the same time, you have to maintain the pleasure that you're getting. It's secondary. You have to maintain it so that you can have your orgasm too, and you maintain that as well so that you can keep your dick hard. Because if you focus 100% of your focus on pleasing that woman, then you may not be able to sustain an erection. Right? If that woman focuses 100% on her own pleasure, then what may happen is, let's say she may get upset with you if she doesn't have an orgasm 1 or 2 times when you have sex. It's not going to happen every single time for every single woman. This is just something you got to understand. She may not have the patience to go forward with it. For guys who are trying to integrate from the other side when you start emotionally, be happy that your woman isn't the type of woman who focuses 100% on her own pleasure, or she would have been left your ass. Right? So it gives you the opportunity to work up to it when a woman takes pleasure in pleasing you. It gives you the opportunity to work up to it. So this is just a little understanding of socio-sexual dynamics when it comes to the masculine-feminine dynamic. The man, you should take that role of being the primary receiver of ego satisfaction and the secondary receiver of pleasure. And your woman should take the role of being the primary receiver of pleasure and the secondary receiver of ego gratification.